Hey guys, it's Emila, and this weekend, I was thinking about summer vacations. I was booking my ticket, and I didn't know where to go at first, but then I ended up booking my ticket to Cuba! Woo! So, when I did this, as any normal person would do, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna research all about Cuba. When I did this, I actually found some pretty interesting stuff. But I gotta say, my favorite thing about Cuba was learning about the Cuban Revolution. So I thought, why not share what I learned with y'all? It's some pretty solid logic. Let's go. So I'm gonna take y'all all the way back to 1952. When I was researching this, I started to realize that the Cuban Revolution had some similarities with the Wheel of Revolution. And it starts off just the same with injustice. So there was a former Cuban president whose name was Batista, and he realized that he was not going to win the upcoming election. So instead of just being a normal guy and accepting that, he decided to actually make a power grab and win the election on his own, or take the election and have them canceled. People were quite upset with this move that he made, and one of these upset people was Fidel Castro. He would have had an awesome shot at getting a seat in Congress, but because of the cancellation of elections, there was no chance for him. So from this point on, Fidel started to plan the downfall of Batista. So now it brings us to the year 1953. But before we get into that year, we are now in the protesting stage of the Wheel of Revolution. But something that I learned with the Cuban Revolution is that they don't like to do peaceful things or small things before bigger things. See, Fidel Castro just goes right on into that violent protest. So he decided to put together a group of 138 men that included his brother. And they went to these Moncada barracks on the down part of Cuba, and they were going to raid the barracks so that they could have weapons, because if they wanted any chance at succeeding at revolution, they had to have weapons. But when they were coming in to raid these barracks, they had a lack of both arms and men, and so they relied heavily on the element of surprise. So, this didn't exactly work out for them, as they ended up having 19 casualties. And if they weren't killed, then they were taken capture. But Fidel and his brother managed to escape, but their moment of glory was very short-lived, as a couple hours later they were captured and they were also sentenced to 15 years in prison. But just as anyone else, they had their public trial. And Fidel has a background of being a lawyer, and so he was able to use his skills and somehow flip the tables at his trial and put it all on the power grab of Batista. And somehow this worked for him, with foreign countries putting pressure on Batista to reform and his amazing trial. But he made his famous quote, "History will absolve me." And due to this international pressure on Batista, he actually had to release a lot of political criminals. And some of these criminals were Fidel and his brother. So they were only in jail for 1 year, putting us at 1954. So after they were released, the brothers fled to Mexico immediately, and they did this so that they could find men who had also been wronged by the government under Batista's ruling. And he actually found 82 men that would join him in the revolution. So this is 2 years of planning over at Mexico, and then they decided to all sail back together in 1956 on the Grandma yacht. So, again, they don't exactly have the best of luck. So when they were sailing back, somehow Batista had heard of this, and so he was ready to ambush them the second they got off that boat. And he did just that. And so when they got off the boat on the side of Cuba, they were ambushed and most people were taken, but somehow again, Fidel and his brother, they got away and escaped to the highlands. Here, they never stopped, but they found more people that had been able to come to the highlands and get away. And they were getting a lot of attention from foreign journalists, and so their information was getting out there, and they were getting pretty well known. So all these rebel groups around Cuba actually wanted to join them. And so they did. They would go to town, and the men, when they entered the villages, they were all treated as liberators. And so this pretty much marks the end of the violent protests, because everyone was getting on their side. The only thing left was Batista. So this is where the change happens in the Wheel of Revolution. And Batista, he saw it coming from a mile away. You know, he was making friends with everyone. They were cheering him on. He knew he was going to be out that door. And so he picked up his things, he got as much money as he could, and he was out of there. And this is all in the year 1959. But Castro made his way leisurely to where the government is, because he was just going through the streets being cheered and clapped on, and he was just living in that glory. So, good for you, Fidel, even though it won't last long. But we won't get into that today, as you've already had your history lesson. So, just to restate, we started in 1952, and we're ending in 1959, with Batista out of office. So, thank y'all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to click subscribe at the end of this video, and I hope to see you back here next week.